Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of The Bridge. Every day around us, we see more and more facts and warnings about the state of our planet. And it's never been more critical for us to achieve a more sustainable way of living and doing business. The Bridge is a series which is dedicated to exploring how technology can help us reach sustainability. And today we're really excited to have some amazing panelists that are going to discuss the opportunity versus the opportunity cost of sustainability in business. Now, remember, throughout the panelist discussions, you can ask us questions through our Q&A process on LinkedIn, and we're going to make sure to try to answer as many of them as possible towards the end. Now, without further ado, I'd like to kick this off and maybe ask our panelists to begin by introducing themselves. Jackie, could you go first?
Sure, thanks, Peter. Hello, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Pynadath. I lead sustainability and innovation efforts here in EMEA for Google Cloud. Very nice to meet you.
Perfect. Nicolas?
Hey, everyone. My name is Nicolas Lefevre-Marton. I lead the Sustainability Solutions team for ENGIE Impact covering the EMEAI region. If you haven't heard of ENGIE Impact, we're a dedicated company to help accelerate the transition towards net zero by providing strategy, technology, digital, financing, and implementation support. Happy to be here.
Super. Thank you for being here. Chris?
Hi, all. My name is Chris Campbell. I lead our supply chain transformation for Mondelēz, focused on digital, and my scope is global. So I get to play in EMEA, but other parts of the world as well, and just thrilled to be a part of this group today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And last but not least, Manas, please.
Hi, I'm Manas Fuloria. I'm a co-founder of Nagarro and CEO, but CEO for us translates into something different. It's custodian of entrepreneurship in the organization. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks to all the other panelists as well for joining us today.
So I'm going to begin with an open conversation. The idea is really to talk about subjects that are dear to your heart and to your organization's focus. So the big question that I want to begin with is, how is sustainability an opportunity and not a cost for companies? How do we change that paradigm in terms of where they're investing, and how is that investment a positive thing? And whoever wants to tackle the first answer, if not, I can always say, okay, well, let's begin actually with Manas. How do you see that being different?
Sure. So, I talked of entrepreneurship in the organization, and I think every organization will have its own different take on sustainability. And for us, it has been very entrepreneurial. So it's been about empowering the individual to do things around sustainability that are close to their heart. So the passion comes through. Of course, we are now a listed company, so it has to be a bit more structured, but the idea has been that. And when it comes to the opportunity versus the cost, I really think the biggest opportunity is in terms of ourselves as Nagarrians, as people who work at Nagarro. Because if you think about it, there's nothing better for quality of life than to participate with other people who are trying to do the good for the planet. And we have a lot of people in India and China, for example, and other developing countries. And if you look at the future of the planet, this is where it's going to be influenced. So if you can sort of marry these things together, it gives a sense of purpose, not just for the company, but for us as individuals as well. And when it comes to tech, we are a technology company. We talk a lot about employer experience, especially with this whole COVID and work from anywhere. It's all about employee digital experience. And the personalized nudges around sustainability, the volunteering around sustainability, the dissemination of expert content around sustainability, all of that ties together. So I think that's how we see it, at least at Nagarro.
Very interesting. And what about you, Jackie? How is Google, the cloud, the technology, the innovations, what are you seeing in your ecosystem that's driving this opportunity?
Sure. I just want to make sure I'm okay. I thought I was muted there. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I think when you go back to your question on, the opportunity versus the opportunity cost, I think that's a great one. And and Manas had a great explanation of it. I think, honestly, at the end of the day, it's one of the things I think that drives all this. It's really about investors and making money for shareholders. That's one element. I think what we're seeing in general, and I think part of your series, The Bridge, is probably going to explore this, is, looking at the shift in global markets when it comes to ESG issues, where I think there's a strong case now for companies that embed sustainability, into their operations. They tend to enjoy, better financial performance, and they're typically run better. So there's many, many studies that are out there that kind of make the case that sustainability does lead to superior financial performance. So making the case that it's kind of more of an opportunity necessarily than a cost. One study I would point to is one of the UN studies that was done around there was a global compact study that they did. And I believe they looked at a period of time, I think it was 2013 to 2019. And they basically found that companies with consistently higher ESG performance enjoyed almost a 4.7x higher operating margins and lower volatility than lower ESG performers over that same period. So in general, I think that this is a very exciting time. The shift with the pandemic, I think, has kind of accelerated these things. And I think that it's becoming companies that are, they're realizing that we need to do more, and that you need to kind of push the envelope to kind of help prevent, these things that are potentially looming, the disasters that are happening around climate change. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
Absolutely.
That's how I would look at it. Yeah.
And Chris, what about you? What are you seeing?
I'll give a caveat first. I'm going to represent my own views versus my company on this one, because it's a deeply personal thing for me. I think in the early days of this topic, whether it was CSR and branching into ESG, it was sort of something you felt like you had to do, specifically in different industries. I think now, to Manas's point and to Jackie's, whether you're looking at it from a shareholder point of view or from just a human employment value proposition or just a human point of view, it's become undeniable. We have one resource, we all share it in the world we live in. The opportunity is, how do I really authentically do what I say I'm going to do? And then what is the tie to my business? If we can bring those two together, it, to me, addresses the debate of if it's a cost or an opportunity cost. It just is. It's a value that we need to deliver, and it's a value equation we need to deliver on. So for me, it comes really down to humans, and I think connecting that to our business model. And that's how I think about it.
Amazing. And Nicolas, this must be fundamental to the work that you're doing, because obviously energy and the utilities companies, they're going to be powering a lot of this sustainability in the future. What are you seeing in your day-to-day or in your month-to-month?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it really is shifting. I think the views from cost to opportunity, I think it's really is shifting. First, I think it's useful to break down what sustainability means, because sustainability is a huge word which has many dimensions. We've heard about ESG, CSR, but even in the E, so the environmental brick, you've got climate, you've got waste, you've got all of these different issues. And really the opportunity versus cost equation will differ depending on all of these. But there are a few fundamentals which are really driving what we see in the business with our clients, even within the energy industry. One of them is what you're saying, Manas, which is really around the individuals, how these topics are really mobilizing individuals to change their way of consumption, to be more vocal in work, to really want to do and follow, take jobs which have some sort of mission around it. That is hugely powerful and is a massive opportunity for sure. Then when you look at from a technological standpoint, I mean, a lot of our sustainability opportunity depends on these technologies becoming cost competitive. And here I'm talking more on the climate industrial front, where, not that long ago, the renewables, which are now ubiquitous, were actually quite a bit more expensive. They've become an opportunity, and they still are for many. And it's true for other technologies which are on the horizon. And then another dimension which we should not forget is the regulation dimension. A lot of these topics are highly regulated. And so whether you are smart enough to see the regulation coming and adapt and preempt them, that's a real opportunity. Otherwise, you risk really being a follower and being a little bit squeezed there. So I think there are multiple dimensions to look at here.
And just to add to what you said, Nicolas, I think that you said that you could break sustainability down into various different topics. And the cost versus opportunity, it varies from each to each. There are some areas like single-use plastic, or which are relatively inexpensive to make that switch. At least as a consumer, I think if you're a producer, it's much more expensive, and I really think Chris is in the probably a very difficult position trying to reorganize the supply chain for sustainability. But as a consumer, these switches are relatively easy. And then there are other areas, like we have been working a lot in the area of public transport, walking and cycling, where it's a win-win-win, right? I mean, we still are not able to get that impact, but if we do get that impact in our cities, it's a win-win-win, because the amount of space we need to keep in our buildings for the cars, we just stand there, the kind of money that we spend, and the pollution in our cities, the air pollution. We did a little survey in and around Delhi, and the average family which had an employee with a member working in our company spent a few $100s every year on things to deal with air pollution, like filters and medicines and hospital visits and things like that. So I think that some of these are much easier. Some of these are more difficult. Also depends on who you are, right, in the chain. If you are just a consumer, or you are somebody who has to completely re-engineer their processes for this new world. It's very interesting that you put it that way. I think that's a good way to look at it. The different types of sustainability, and each one has a different characteristic.
Which is a really great transition to the next question, because it does depend on who you are, right? And the cost is different for everybody. There's been retail brands recently who have faced a huge amount of wrath by consumers who no longer will buy their purchases because sustainability wasn't respected. On the contrary, it was proven as a polluter or something. And so there are obvious costs to unsustainable choices. Now that's as a retail or as a consumer. What are some of the other ones beyond the obvious, that our planet may not survive long enough for us to have a future? Beyond the obvious, what are some of the other costs that are linked to unsustainable choices?
I mean, one which is, I'll just jump in here. So I think the one that you mentioned around really kind of grasping the change in consumer behaviors and how powerful consumers have become on these topics, I think is critical. So I'm glad that you put it in the obvious bucket, but it's maybe not for all. So I think it's really, really good. One which I think is less obvious, which we tend to separate in the climate speak, it's mitigation versus adaptation. And that's basically the risk of actual real environmental changes really impacting your business. And I think that is a cost or a risk, I would say, which is probably still underappreciated. And really businesses being ready to adapt their infrastructure to really real climate changes, I think is critical. And the more and more, I think you'll see a blend of mitigation that is reducing your own footprint, and adaptation, which is really hardening your infrastructure and really thinking about a changing environment, which is certain to happen, as we all know.
Would anybody else like to react?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that's a great. Those are great points, Nicolas. And I think, I want to go back to one thing that you said in the beginning, is that it may feel consumer choices, it may be obvious, but sometimes it's not quite so obvious. And I think that with the focus on sustainability and climate change today, that more and more, I think people are trying to become more and more informed. And so, when you think about the trade-offs, when you're looking at these kind of unsustained choices, if you will, and Chris, I mean, obviously you're an expert in this area, so I'm going to make a statement, and please feel free to jump in on here. But I was just thinking about kind of, within the supply chain, for example, on the way that companies make, sourcing decisions, they do affect big environmental issues, for example, in some industries like deforestation. So if you look at things like, agriculture and forestry, one question does arise, or one of many, were the materials, were they sourced sustainably, or do they actually contribute to deforestation? So I think that, from a consumer perspective, it's one thing that I think that is really interesting is it's not enough anymore for suppliers to just self-certify that whatever they're selling is sustainably sourced. I think that companies, consumers, investors, they want to know that the choices that are being made in the supply chain are actually not hurting the environment. So kind of when you look at the broader supply chain and logistics space, I do think that there's clear costs, and trade-offs to kind of consider when it comes to measuring this, and it might not be so obvious to everyone. So I did want to surface that, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Chris, because you obviously are a clear expert in this area.
Jackie, you're going to get me in trouble calling me an expert. I'm not. I would aspire to be. For me, it's a personal passion at this point. But being in supply chain, I'll try to combine the two, because I think this idea of consumer power shifting is clear. This idea of risk mitigation on the supply chain, it's become a non-deniable thing. And so when we look at tier N of the supply chain, we're not just accountable for that finished good that's coming to the consumer. We're looking at supplier 1, 2, and 3. And to your point, actually helping them figure out how do they run their supply chain in a way that's meeting our standards, but then also be able to sustain that. So I think it's something that's becoming probably one of our top challenges, to be honest. It used to be, can I get supply? Now it's, can I get supply at the right standard, at the right way for the local and global community at the same time? And when you look at what's happening in the world today with, conflict, inflation, transparency, all of that has become really hard to manage, to be quite honest. And so we're trying new and different ways to figure out how do we bring all that together, and how do you find that balance between always making sure you're meeting your standard and ensuring you can run your business. And that's the trade-off right now for everybody in the supply chain, especially.
I fully agree. I think it's a great point. This supply chain demands are going to be just, they're really, to some extent, I think from an environmental and sustainability standpoint, still, unfortunately, quite in their infancy. And part of the challenge, I think, is just the difficulty with data. And that is really an opportunity, which I'm sure we're going to get to as well. But the supply chain data challenges, you see how hard it is for most companies to just put their scope 1 and 2 footprint, so their own direct emission footprint. It's still, in most companies, I think, unfortunately, still an Excel effort, which takes many weeks, and it's done once a year, and it's clumsy. But when it comes to scope 3 and the supply chain visibility, we're really, really far off still, unfortunately. I know there are a lot of very exciting solutions coming to market, which are really awesome, but there's a big shift to come there, and really a necessary one.
See, we spoke about consumer preferences shifting, or consumers getting more conscious about the choices that were made in getting the product to them. But I think the elephant in the room is consumers starting to question whether they even want the product or service or not. You see, as consumers, let's face it, we are all addicted. We were addicted to that new dress, new pair of shoes, new car, whatever, right? So it's an addiction, right? And it's not necessary that this will be the way we will be 100 years from now. It might be worse, it might be better. I do feel that in the developing countries, this has been set up as the model of progress, as the model of what to aspire for or to work hard towards. And because the rest of the environment has been degraded and so on, there are no alternative ways of getting yourself high on pleasure. There's no beautiful parks to go to, there's no forest to go, and no mountains to climb that are unspoiled and so on. So it's a real de-addiction that has to somehow be navigated. That's at least how I see it. When you're talking of data, Nicolas, I think as a producer, supply chain data is one thing, but the human psychology data and predicting where this will go, it's very difficult, right? It might end up being, a storm in a teacup and nothing really changes. It might end up being, very, very significant. Right? So we don't really know, I think.
For those joining us late, this is, by the way, The Bridge. It's a panel that's dedicated to discussing technology and sustainability. Thank you for joining us. And please continue. I'm sorry I interrupted. It was doing the moderator job.
I think, Manas, your point is really interesting around how do we drive true behavioral change, because technology is not going to solve it on its own. And unfortunately, this notion of really getting people to change their behaviors around these topics has been around for a very, 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 very long time. And the reality is that it's actually quite hard. It happens, but it's hard, and it takes a lot of time to get people unhooked, as you suggested. I think two things which can and are making a difference is one, how that impacts the wallet. So having a clear price signal on some of these environmental dimensions really is effective. We know that. And the second thing is to start seeing real consequences of the risks that we're talking about. So people are now really not viewing climate or the environment as an intergenerational topic, but it's really affecting themselves, their generation, their children, and that is really having a very strong impact, I think. And that's probably the first time that we see that in the past maybe decade or two.
I do think that nudges can be used to influence behavior, but it depends on in whose interests it is to influence the behavior. I mean, if you look at Facebook or any of the social media sites and the way they steer you as a user, right, towards viewing certain content and so on, or try to make certain content. I mean, if you look at all the people making videos on TikTok, they found a way to create this rather unnatural behavior and to sort of spawn it across the globe, for example, right? So I do believe that the technologies are there. I don't know who is working on it. I don't think governments are working on it. I don't think companies are working on it yet. Who has the firepower and the thought process to actually work to change behavior? That's an interesting question, I think.
Which leads us to a perfect next question, right? Because we're talking about changing behavior. Now, COVID, for example, the pandemic was a big behavior changer for many. Prerogatives were reset. What was important in one's life was reset. So it's true that often enough we need a catalyst. And once that catalyst comes, change comes, and be it long-term or middle-term, we'll see. But COVID was an enabler. So it enabled technology, for example, to really play a defining role as to workplace culture, how we're going to stay together. And in many cases, it kept us connected to the world that we were hiding from, right? So it was an interesting moment, and it fueled some of the thinking that we had for the bridge, which was, okay, if technology did that during the pandemic, what could technology do for sustainability? It's just as critical. It's just as urgent. Time is not on our side, right? So we've seen changes start, right? All of a sudden, we're being told that we could potentially fix that phone that we were getting rid of every year, right? And brands are coming around to telling us, well, maybe the things that had turned into commodities now we'll teach you how to keep them longer. So there's all sorts of like movements that are starting to appear. But what others do you see, and how is technology going to help?
Sure, I'd be happy to jump on that question. So I think the way that the way that we're trying to look at this, I mean, fundamentally, I think to solve kind of these challenges, if you will, I think a big tenet of what we need to do is we have to decarbonize, right? I mean, no matter what we do, we need to decarbonize our operations, and everything that we do is really driven, kind of by technology, by data, by leadership, and collaboration. I think these are kind of the key areas. So for us, using advanced, technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, advanced analytics, predictive insights, these are for us the way that we look at things and bringing, how we can leverage big data to help companies, make the best decisions, towards supporting, their sustainability objectives, excuse me. So if I was to speak about, my own company, so here at Google, sustainability has been a core value for the past 20 years. And we operate what we like to say is the cleanest cloud in the industry, with the smartest, the most efficient, energy efficient data centers. So for our customers, when they work with us, when they kind of move to Google Cloud, this dramatically helps our customers to kind of, reduce their carbon footprint overnight. So that's kind of where we're coming from. But if you couple that with the innovation that's needed and the scale that's needed, to kind of solve some of these tough climate changes, I think a lot of this is going to come out of the innovations that we're finding, in the cloud world, if you will. We work with every industry to kind of help them look at things like, increasing their climate resiliency, of course, applying the different types of cloud technologies to do things like responsible sourcing or climate risk analysis or, sustainable logistics or, trying to tackle food waste as an example, or the plastics problem or whatever it might be. So we're kind of looking at it holistically. And so we very much believe that technology is a much needed and a massive way to kind of think about using this towards solving the various challenges that are out there in the world.
Very cool. Chris, I'm Chris. I'd be really interested to know. Yeah.
I love what Jackie said, and I think there's sort of two secular trends for me that are critical at any macro shift. The one I think is data for sure as an underlying enabler, but the two around that are for me monetization and decentralization or democratization. So to Jackie's point, if we can harness this data, this advanced technology, AI, ML, NLP, whatever it ends up being, but then expose it to audiences where they're at, right? Whether they're sitting in corporate boardrooms, on their phones, wherever, or they're sitting down the street and looking at a package in a grocery store that says, oh my gosh, this is X, Y, and Z of impact on the environment. And then the second part of that is not just giving them the visibility, but then giving them power to do something about it. And I think where you look at, fintech, for example, and this idea of DAOs or decentralized autonomous orgs, if that starts to show up in, more laggard industries, CPG, retail, this whole idea of proxy votes and activist shareholders now becomes decentralized, whether I'm paying for it at the register and that's my vote, or I'm actually having enough of an ability to impact the organization differently. So to me, this idea of data is central, but the two trends that are going to lever up on that are this idea of how do I monetize that data? Buying green bonds is a great example of that, right? Everybody's talking about how they're buying these bonds. The other thing is then how do I get the power out of the hands of a few and put it into the hands of many? And I'm not talking, politics, socialism, and communism, but how do we actually give people platforms? And now with blockchain, with different ways, we can give the same things that people have had historically in the very small hands of a few to the masses. And I think that's going to be a huge opportunity. And to the point that was made earlier, Peter, by yourself around, what technology did to us in the pandemic, we're not going back. We're not going back. I mean, no one's going back to the office 6 days a week, commuting in their cars. It's not happening. So now the question is, what's the next tipping point? And I think we're going to see it obviously around data, but I think those other two trends are really important to scale it.
This is really, really awesome. This is some super inspiring and very cool ideas and hopefully things that we will see in the realm of sustainability. For me, there are two things which are really critical is getting just the acquisition of very hard to get sustainability data. That's the one piece. And then bringing it to the boardroom, to the executive committees of large companies, so they start treating money and carbon or other environmental KPIs the same way, which is a trend that we're seeing. These KPIs are becoming very, very important. They just need to get really quality, reliable data that they can get the right insights and make decisions on. And then there's a whole different trend, which is the maybe slower coming in the industrial realm. A lot of these technologies take a very long time to develop. So we know them; they've been on their learning curves for a while back. For example, hydrogen has been discussed for decades, and it is now appearing that it is not only an essential vector in order to get to deep decarbonization in very hard to abate sectors such as heat in industrial context or large scale, long distance transportation of goods and services. For example, the green heat, I think, is a technology area which is maybe less exciting, but nonetheless very important. And hydrogen, green hydrogen, and biomethane, I think, are things to really watch in the next decade. The same way that solar and wind were 2 decades ago, I think.
Yeah, and really, what I think is really interesting is all of you keep coming back down to the 4 different levels, right? There's the individual, and the choices the individual needs to make. So shifting our behavior away from the commodity, away from always needing to purchase that next little benefit of the next item that we really need. And then there's on a business level, then there's on a board level, there's a government level, and all of them need that information and transparency and the understanding of cause and effect, which is what we don't necessarily have today. So I think that that's cool how you're all basically connected on that. So how do we get it? How do we get to that? How can technology provide us with those KPIs? Is there a technology that you see coming down that we should be excited about that could help us reach our goals?
I'm quite excited by just the technology around the human psychology, right? I mean, I mentioned it before. For example, one of the themes that we are trying to work on at Nagarro is that we're not just looking at our footprint, but at the footprint of all of the family, Nagarian family, in each of their homes around the world, right? And for that, they're sharing, for example, their electricity consumption or power consumption, and then seeing how it stacks up against people in different parts of the world with similar sized families and things like that. I think there's a level of pure just sensitization. There's a level of the sort of peer dynamics where you start comparing and challenging yourself and so on. And then, there are higher levels of, stuff can be mandated, right? But I think that there's a lot that can be done with just this nudges and implicit peer pressure, if you will, right? So I think that that stuff exists. We just need to figure out who will run it, who will pay for it, what will you try to achieve with it. I think that, and especially Google, for example, with all the its touch points into all our lives, right? I mean, there's so many different ways you can nudge people to be a little bit greener and cleaner. I think it's fascinating.
So I would, so thank you, Manas, and I would add to that on the Google front. I mean, I know our CEO, we made a commitment to, bring, to help empower, over 1 billion users to make more sustainable individual choices. So doing things like using Google Maps, right? Finding, like your example that you made earlier on, around air pollution and kind of transportation. So, using maps to kind of make, to pick the most optimal, low carbon decision in terms of how you're going to get from point A to point B. So there, there's that. Even getting into, kind of if you look at Google Flights. So when you're flying places, you can try to make choices based on the carbon footprint of the emissions of that particular flight. So there's lots of things that we're trying to infuse into this, and that kind of goes into the legacy and the history of the company, and that we're really trying to do that. But I think one of the things I wanted to kind of bring it to Peter, for us, I think the artificial intelligence and machine learning and big data and analytics, that's kind of for us, that's the juicy stuff. I think that's the interesting place where I think that a lot of incredible innovation is going to come out of. And again, bringing it back to the comment that you made earlier on the air pollution, I think you were saying, was it in Delhi, I think you were talking about? So one of the things that we've done as a company is that, at scale, collecting large pieces of data is something, of course, anonymized data is something that we've done. And we've actually created, kind of for the greater good, one of our solutions that we've created is around, it's called Environmental Insights Explorer. So you can go look at it, and this was designed for cities or municipalities. And I believe up till today, I think we have at least 500 cities, and the ambition is to get to at least 20,000 in the next several years. But the idea here is that we're kind of taking our capabilities around geospatial, so our Google Earth Engine, the geospatial and satellite imagery, coupled with the maps, technology that we have, to look at a city footprint and to look at measuring the building emissions, the transportation emissions, and the air quality in those cities. So for us, that's out there. You can go look at it. It's something that's available for people to take advantage of. Of course, it's kind of more in line with the municipalities. But the idea behind this of, kind of using that geospatial and the big data and the analytics behind that, we've taken that and we've used it with other of our commercial customers to kind of help them solve some of their problems. In Chris's industry, we've worked with Unilever, for example, where we've helped them around their making better sustainable sourcing decisions using our Google Earth Engine capabilities. Same in the logistics space. If you go look at UPS, we've helped them make better, I guess I would say more optimizing their delivery routes. And because of the optimization, you get, a much greater savings on fuel costs. I think, there's some studies out there you can see, but just to give you a representation. So I fully hear what you're saying. It's definitely part of our mission, and we're trying to bring more and more of these types of things to bear that others can take advantage of.
And today, Jackie, I took public transport to get to the office in Munich from the train station just because of Google Maps. So you scored one there.
Excellent.
And Chris, Nicola, I'm sure you guys also have examples of things that you've done, are doing, utilizing technology or not, but that you could tell us about, like things that your companies have done in terms of sustainability, bragging rights that you can share with us.
So maybe I'll start. So first at the ENGIE Impact level. So my company, we work. I think our sweet spot is really helping industrials manage their and decarbonize their industrial footprint. So really being able to help take oftentimes disperse industrial sites and help them through optimization and a deep knowledge of decarbonization technologies across electricity, heat, and others, really provide deep decarbonization plans for any industrial sites. And that's something which I think is probably underappreciated, how many of these factories around the world just needs to be one at a time almost really decarbonized. And so that's one thing which we do effectively, and we do that really across the globe, which is one of the challenges that so many companies have, is that they oftentimes have dozens of industrial sites, and being able to go deep on each of these, I think, is really critical. I think that there's a whole lot that can be done with existing technologies. I know we like to talk about these future technologies, but there's a whole lot that can be done with existing technologies. And we have another big challenge is that still leaders around the world don't have the understanding, the capabilities around these technologies. They've typically been trained and are experts in their industry, but all of a sudden we're asking them to take on this whole new dimension and to do something about it really quick. And oftentimes it requires mobilizing quite a bit of capital. So I think there's a whole lot that needs to be done with existing technologies and just getting the leadership around the world to be able to get on board.
Yeah, Nicholas, I think that's the salient point for me. Is we can talk about the technologies, we can talk about a million examples, but there's two things for me that really have to come together. One, you have to have a set of leaders that understands what technology to focus on now, because it's really easy to scatter and look at the hype cycle and go. The second thing is you have to be careful of scattering your focus within the sustainability and technology agenda. In my past life, I worked for an organization and a brilliant business leader. And he called in the head of sustainability and said, explain to me everything we're doing. And when they put it on a page, there were 37 different sustainability initiatives. And so all had great value, intrinsically, all made some loose connection to the business, but 37 different initiatives aren't going to move the needle sustainably either for the business or for the social good. And so I think having the courage to focus on one or two key technologies within a horizon that makes sense, and the discipline to tie it to your business, is something that we can all do now. And I love Manas's example of looking at the entire organizational household. Great. That's a key focus. You can do something with that, right? Jackie's example of environmental footprint. But I think it's really easy to get distracted in this space. And it's happened to me. What I love to see is just really a disciplined technology focus and a business leader who's saying, you know what, I might be wrong, I might leave opportunities on the table, but I'm going to focus on these 2 to 3 things and really make a sustainable impact in them.
I think that's super important. And let's not forget that, even to reach the UNFCCC guidance of getting globally to net zero by mid-century, let's say, in order to do that, investments in the the heavy industrial areas, the energy industry in particular, they need to do now. It's investment decisions which are going to happen in the next few years. Because typical large-scale heavy asset investments are 25 years. And so you've got some big decisions that are happening right now in many boardrooms of large, complex industrial companies, which are really going to define our ability to achieve these long-term objectives. So the power of now is very, very, very important.
So Nicolas, we're counting on you. You have to be very persuasive.
I was just going to add to Nicolas. I mean, I echo everything you're saying. That is so important. And I think one of the key areas, if you just focus on the energy efficiency, right? If we just look at just energy, and I think that's a big part of my company's business is consuming a lot of energy. And so if we just lean in and try to figure that out, and we've made some great achievements on that, but I think our ambition is to run on carbon-free energy, so 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. So everything we do is focused on that, and I would say that's 8 years away. It's a moonshot. Is the technology there yet? I mean, there's still a lot of things that have to be done. So I think your point on, kind of doing that, and Chris, your point also on pick one or two things and just do it really well, right? And because you can't tackle everything. So for us, let's go and, try to be, the most energy efficient business that we possibly can and really decarbonize as much as possible. So I would say, I just wanted to add to what you were saying, because I do think it's critical, because otherwise we are scattershot. It's like you can be pulled in 1,000 different directions. So, yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question to Manas, because caring is a very big part of the Nagarro brand, and it's really something that powers Nagarro. So we've done a lot at Nagarro in terms of ESG, and what's the one thing that you see coming in Nagarro's future, which is going to be different? The one thing that in the upcoming year we're going to try to tackle?
So I would have said this thing around working with Nagarian families, but since I've already said that, I'll say some other thing. No, I think that we've been working for a long time with clients on their energy saving technologies. We work with a lot of companies in the energy space, but what we see now in next year, for example, we expect every single client to be trying to understand how the work we do is affecting their outcomes on carbon and sustainability. And it includes not just the actual working of the projects that we are building, etc., but also the innovation in the design of these projects. Because you are working with a auto company on let's say how consumers access their cars, but does it go into subscriptions? Does it go into other clean mileage incentives? Does it go into? There's just an enormous range of different tools that we collect, work across industries, and we expect our clients to want us to come to the table with these ideas and innovations. I think that's the biggest theme, for us in the next year.
And that's going to bring up a really interesting point, right? So digital transformation, it's been, all the buzz. Like it's basically the equivalent of Smurf. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything. And now we're starting to realize that digital transformation is also shifting, disruption. It's also fueling disruption, new business models, new opportunities. So Chris, this is one for you. Are we reaching a point where we're starting to think of sustainable digital transformation as opposed to just digital transformation, which is business focused?
It's a fantastic question, and one that could probably inspire. Excuse me, my dog wants to weigh in. I think it could spawn the next episode of The Bridge, to be honest. It's a worthwhile topic. I think it depends on the industry. I've grown up in analog industries versus where, Jackie has the opportunity to work in sort of a digitally native company. For the analog, I think it's still very much a work in process. I think we point to technology and say the technology will fix the thing. It will make the life better. It will end whatever problem we're solving. And I think we overlook the cultural and behavior aspect that has to come with it. And for me, that's what drives a sustainable digital transformation, is the cultural willingness to keep learning and changing. The idea that something has a 3 to 5 year payback and then goes in perpetuity, for me, doesn't exist anymore. And so I think, how do we bring that product, that agile mindset into the digital transformation? That's how we sustain. And it's no longer about getting to the end. It's about constantly reinventing along the way. And how do we learn and apply those learnings as quickly as possible? And I think, again, in the legacy industries, I think it's still very much an uphill climb to getting people to sustainable digital transformation versus transformation. And I'll just use one example. When I first started in my last 2 companies, AI, ML just kept getting thrown out everywhere. And you'd ask somebody, well, what does that mean? And you'd get, everything from, why are you asking me that? You should just know what it means, right? Like to, reams of definitions. And again, I think it's important. The data is important. The technology is important. But for me, that sustainability is really a value, culture, behavior equation, not a technology equation. And that's where I think we still have, all of us, myself included, some room to grow.
Really fascinating answers. So I'm gonna open it up to anybody, any reactions to that. And I'm gonna remind also the public, we're gonna be asking your questions very soon. So feel free to start asking them, and please continue.
I would agree with Chris, and I would say even in the digital, the digital native world, if you will, change management is everything. So cultural, figuring out, to your point on what the cultural norms are and where change management can be applied. Technology is only as good as the people that are actually putting it into place, and that you have the mandate to kind of do that. So, I would fully agree. And I think to the bigger question, I think the COVID pandemic, I think, really shined a light on a lot of things. And so hopefully we'll see more and more people getting behind, that it's serious. These are things that we have to do. And I'm not going to refer, all the reports that are out there. These are things that we as humans in general, we need to do these things because, our next generations are going to be very severely challenged. So change management for me is I think that's imperative across all industries and places. Yeah.
So technology is often viewed as something that's exclusive towards the highly developed or the rich, or and in many ways, developing countries. The idea is that if you're a developing country, you can use less clean technology in order to develop, and then once you develop, you're supposed to go cleaner. That's the idea that many people seem to have. How do we change that paradigm? How do we also get developing countries to realize now is the time to act responsibly, and there are better ways of driving your development?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe I take express at least my opinions. I don't know the answer. See, I think what we have seen in developing countries is that there is often a leapfrog effect, right? So, for example, in India, there never was really a time when everybody had landline phones. Everyone just went to mobile phones. Everyone went to smartphones, and has some of the biggest smartphones or penetrations. In China, you see that technology is being used, really, really aggressively. They're probably innovating more with technology than many other countries. I think, though, the challenge comes with people at the base of the pyramid, right? People who are burning coal or wood for heat or for cooking. People who are running very small sugar, molasses refining, things, or brick kilns and all of that, right? How do you engage there? And the problem is that the work that has to be done by governments, and this work also is not the kinds where, major projects have to be built. It requires a lot of small interventions, and it's not sexy, let's face it, right? And it's, and you have a population who's voting, at least in India, voting, but that is preoccupied with just simply living their lives. They don't care so much that the air is, AQI is 600 or whatever. They're just trying to make ends meet. So I think this sort of global conversation around targets, etc., is very, very important. I cannot stress how important it is, because all the local conversations driven by NGOs, driven by people who have reached a level of comfort and can think about these topics, they would not get anywhere without global conversations. So I think we are having them. I think we are on the right path. But there's also this sense of, Europe went through its dirty period and the US went through its dirty period, and why not us? But I think that with the world really now in crisis, I think we will maybe escape this. I do feel that we are past that point now of everyone demanding that they have a right to pollute for another few decades. But it's just because of global pressure.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, this two-speed world that you outlined, Peter, has at least from the carbon standpoint, I think was very much true for a large first phase of the UN framework when we had Annex 1 countries, Annex 2 countries. But I think one of the greatest contribution of the Paris Agreement was really to actually put everybody on a similar footing. So kind of get that to the distinction between those two speeds is slightly different. And I think that's a very important point, because if we were to wait, as Manas said, for the emerging economies to get their time to pollute, we're absolutely guaranteed never going to get there. So it just can't, the equation just doesn't work. Peter, I did want to go back to one point that you mentioned before, if you don't mind.
Of course.
The way that you framed the question was quite interesting on the digital transformation. You distinguish between the sustainable digital transformation and regular business digital transformation to some extent. And I think that if we continue to make that distinction between regular business and sustainable business, that is at the heart of our challenge. And it comes back to this notion that I was mentioning before, that until we get environmental KPIs in the boardroom at the same level as financial KPIs, we're always going to struggle. And so it's really, I just wanted to point out the way that you framed the question. And in companies such as ENGIE, which are to some extent carbon companies, because they're energy companies, every single investment made has to meet the is a carbon investment as well. There are finite budgets in order to achieve the net zero targets that the company has set. So to some extent, interestingly, maybe not digital companies such as Google, but that equation already of having both carbon and money on the same footing for every investment decision is already to some extent taking place. So just wanted to point that out.
Which I think is very close to what Manas was also saying in terms of the clients that they're meeting, which is that distinction is disappearing. And what I think is really important for our viewers is that if that distinction doesn't disappear, if we continue to treat one, like, so in one office, we've got the sustainability people and the other people, and that's seen as a cost because, we have to invest in sustainability, we're obliged to. And then the other one, people are thinking about the digital, the future. And those two aren't talking together, then there's not only a missed opportunity, but a real problem in terms of the goals that we want to achieve. So thank you, Nicolas, you're absolutely right. And Nicolas, there's a question that from our audience coming for you, which is, one thing is certain, be it work from anywhere or be it our future, we're consuming a lot of power. And that consumption of power doesn't seem like it's going to go away. It's probably only going to go upwards. So is there a way for us to continue to consume all of this power, but sustainably? Can we do it? What's the most sustainable way for us to still power our growth, but clean?
Yep. So I'll take your question literally to say power as in electricity. So there are 2 points, and it's an obvious answer. But as Jackie mentioned, first thing you really do need to do is really make sure that these eternal low-hanging fruits of energy efficiency that we've been talking for a very, very long time, it's really critical to capture these. It is doable at industrial scale. We've got a program going with Faurecia, an automotive parts manufacturer, where we are helping them achieve significant energy efficiency gains across their full industrial footprint. So it is doable at industrial scale, and it really has to be done. And then there's the second side of the coin, which is just buying greener electricity, which luckily now is actually doable again at really large scale. So these notion of renewable energy, the PPAs, revolution that we've here, the very elaborate contracting 24/7 that Jackie mentioned, that Google is really aiming to do in the next few years. So it's increasingly doable. The challenge is that everybody's now turning to it. So demand for renewables is very, very, very high. And when you have pressure on the markets that we see currently now with the war in Ukraine, it's even more challenging. But it certainly is a possibility, and it is doable. When it gets to heat, which is the other part, that's a bit more tricky.
So we'll do the follow-up bridge dedicated to digital transformation, sustainable, and heat. It sounds like the perfect topic. We're closely running out of time. I think there's one other question that we can ask, and it's a fun one because I think everyone can chime in very quickly, is what are we telling governments who aren't using AI today or automation to meet their supply chain needs? Like how can we tell them, hey, it's time? What's the right message?
Did you say governments?
Yes. Countries.
You can't really tell governments anything. They don't listen.
So I'll jump in. So on that one, I mean, so I think your joke is actually spot on, Manas. So, look, the proliferation of data, it's exploding everywhere, and I think we've talked about this quite a bit in various flavors. There's so much data, and actually making it actionable, making it to a point where it could be used, to kind of solve the types of challenges that we have. There's disparate data sources all around the world. If we just try to look at the basic type of reporting that a lot of companies and governments have to do, just the measure, record, report, just basic reporting that everyone needs to get to. It's really, really hard to kind of get to that level. So I would say employing new technologies, putting technologies like artificial intelligence on top to go help with the aggregation of data, to get to the type of insights, training, machine learning models, to kind of get specific outcomes that you're looking for, I think is going to be very, very important. And it is the future. I mean, you can't just put people on this, it's just too big. The problems are just too big. You actually need technology to kind of automate a lot of this behind the scenes. So I would say, do it. It's to use your jokes earlier, Peter, the Yoda joke, right?
Yes.
There is no try, just do. So I would say it's just something that I think it doesn't matter where you get that from. It's a problem that we all have to kind of tackle together. So awesome. That's how I would look at it. Yeah.
We've really run out of time, but this was a fascinating discussion. I wanted to thank you all for participating. It was invaluable. The exchange was great, and I hope that the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And we look forward to hosting you in the future, and hope we have the privilege to do so. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.